everyone. How are you doing? Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ask Coach Ruth. If this is your first time on the channel, I want to say a special welcome to you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And Ask Coach Ruth is a page where I get to answer all your questions on love, dating, relationships, and marriage. My name is Ruth Esumeh. I am a marriage counselor and marriage therapist. One of the things that gives me the greatest fulfillment is helping people to enjoy their marriage and helping singles make wise relationships decisions. And that's why I started Ask a Truth. So today's episode, we have questions. And as usual, we're going to get into the questions. Okay, so the first question here says, my husband currently lives outside of the country. How do we fulfill our sexual desires to each other? Oh, long distance relationships, long distance marriages are something that I understand that could be very challenging, especially when it comes to the aspect of sex. So, the first thing I advise is you must have a plan to come back together. The way that God designed marriage is for the two people to be together. I mean, Paul said, if you burn, go and marry, meaning that we have sexual desires, we have sexual urges, and marriage is that place to contain all those desires. So, if a couple is living apart after marriage, you must make plans to come back together. It should not be something that's permanent. It should not take too long because your bodies will desire each other. So, first, have a plan to come back together. Now, one of the things that you must also do, I'm going to give a couple of things that would help if you are in in a marriage, and to help you with your sexual desires. First of all, you have to be busy. You have to be busy. I believe that you're both working. Secondly, is that you have to have honest conversations. And one of the honest conversations you must have is what is allowed between the two of you. What is allowed? Now, it's about the two of you here because sex is sacred between the couple. So, what is allowed between the two of you? So, you want to discuss, is it okay for the two of us to masturbate while we are watching each other? You know, maybe you are on a video call and you help each other to reach orgasm by masturbating. It's important that you discuss it because it's not, because one of the things we must know about sex in marriage is it must be mutual. There must be mutual consensus. There must be mutual agreements. The marriage bed must not be defiled, meaning that there must not be third party. So this is why I am against masturbating with watching videos and stuff, because you are fulfilling those sexual desires with another party involved, not your spouse. But you can have conversations and agree on what you guys both want to what is going to be allowed in a marriage. Are we going to be allowed to masturbate together? So you can try that option if you're both comfortable with it, but you must be careful that you don't get used to masturbating, because masturbating is really pleasuring yourself. Even though you're looking at each other, you're still pleasuring yourself. The challenge with that is when you come back together, it might be hard for you to get comfortable with reaching orgasm with your partner pleasuring you, because you're used to pleasuring yourself. So it's a little bit dicey, but these are conversations you should have. Also, you should talk about are you allowed to send sexual stimulating pictures to each other via your phones? Now, this is another place where you have to be careful, because you want to be sure that those pictures do not get into another person's hand. So you really have to be careful with these things, but you should have open and honest conversations with each other about these areas where you can get sexual satisfaction from each other. Sex toys, I do not recommend in long distance marriages, because it's very easy to sex toys is an object. So the focus of sex toys, it's basically, now I don't mean props, because there's props and there's toys. Props are, I mean, you can use a pillow to prop yourself up during sex, but I mean the actual sex toys that gives you pleasure, that you can even reach orgasm through them. I do not really recommend it when you are alone. because it is an object. It functions differently from a human being. Human beings are not machines. So when we're having sex in marriage, there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just the button that you press and it starts working. Your emotions are into it. You could have had a conflict, and all of that comes into the lovemaking. There is pain. There's a lot that comes into lovemaking beyond just penetration or stimulation, which is what the sex toys are focused on. So I would say that using sex toys could potentially be a problem when you finally come back together, because you're used to the methodical way of having sex. Your partner is stimulating you differently than the way the sex toy. You're able to really control the sex toy to the speed, the level. There's a lot that goes into it. So I would not really encourage it. And this is why I say, to be honest, when it comes to married couples, I recommend that you should have an arrangement that helps you to be together, or at least to see each other often enough to satisfy your sexual desires, because it's part of why you got married. There's no point suffering yourself after marriage. So you need to have a plan. But beyond that, if you are unable to be together immediately, talk about these things that you both can use to satisfy each other sexually and agree on them. Once you and your spouse have that mutual consensus on maybe masturbation, okay, you're going to watch each other and masturbate each other, you're going to have sex talks with each other, and that helps you to release the tension or the urges or the orgasms, as long as the two of you agree. But be careful that whatever you're doing do not have the potential to affect your sexual relationship when you're together. So, yeah. So the second question, I'm just going to go into it immediately. The second question says here, hello, Coach Ruth. Would you advise a woman who cheated to tell her husband? Wow. So this question is I'm not going to say, I'm just going to talk about it, because I would have liked to have a bit more conversation with this person to understand the affair. What happened? Where are you at currently with the affair? Has it stopped? Was it a one-time thing? Who is the person? Is it your ex? How did you meet the person? There's a lot of questions I would have liked to ask before answering this question. But on a surface level, would you advise? Yes, I would advise. And the reason why I would advise is because that's the honest and the right thing to do. It might not be the best thing to do. And the reason why it might not be the best thing to do is because actions have consequences. So it means that while your husband may forgive you, he might not be able to deal with that. And that will not be his fault. That will just be the consequences of your actions. He might not be able to continue in the marriage. Some people, cheating is a deal breaker for them. But for the purpose of honesty and the right thing, I would advise that you tell your husband. But I would advise that maybe before you tell your husband, you might want to tell him from a place where you know that you have taken accountability and responsibility. So you're not just telling him what you did, you are also telling him what you are doing to prevent it. You might also need to bring in a counselor to help you sort in the information rather than telling him alone. The counselor might be able to intervene and say, this was a moment of what's the word now? A moment of weakness, and the counselor might be able to guide that conversation between you and your husband, because it might not go really well. So there's a lot to know before you just go ahead and tell your husband and say, oh, I cheated on you. I would not recommend getting family members involved, because except they're really mature people and they are knowledgeable, because they could really take sides and make things messy. I would recommend getting a neutral counselor. If you feel, because I know the reason why you're probably asking this question is because the guilt is eating you up. So talk to God about it. I know God has forgiven you, but our consequences, whether God has forgiven us or not, some of the consequences we cannot we cannot pray them away. So for instance, if you get pregnant, that's not God. That's just natural consequences that happened. So but if you believe that, if you think the guilt is eating you up, the honest and the right thing to do would be to tell your husband. But before you tell your husband, get guidance. If I'm going to sit in that conversation, there's a way that I would guide the conversation. It doesn't take out the hurt that your husband will feel. You also want to tell him and let him know the steps that you're taking to prevent it. So you must also remember that when you tell him, he might decide to leave the marriage, maybe not get a divorce, but he might want to have some space away from you for a while. Be willing to accept all the consequences for the actions and be willing to work towards mending the trust that you have broken. So if you are going to tell him, you're not just giving him the information. Remember that there's also a lot of work that you would have to do to mend the relationship that has been broken. So I would say that's the right thing to do. That's the thing to do as a person of integrity. And I also believe that you've learned your lessons from this experience, meaning that you know what led you there, you know what got you to that place of cheating. And I want to believe that you would start to get help, not to put yourself in this situation again. And I pray that God will strengthen you, will give you the wisdom, the right words to say when you want to tell your husband. So, guys, this is the end of today's episode. I'm sure you've learned something. Drop a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with as many people as you want so that we can spread the word. Until then, I'll see you again next week. Bye.